Between 1589 and 1613, William Shakespeare authored 38 plays, 158 sonnets, and 2 really, really long poems. His collected works are second only to the Bible as the most quoted printed word in the world. He's credited with inventing phrases like foregone conclusion and with bated breath, and adding 1,700 words to the English language. His canon has been adapted to everything from films to kabuki plays, and his work has never once gone out of print in over 400 years. He is, undoubtedly, the ultimate master of the written word. But then again, maybe not. It wasn't until 1796, over 170 years after Shakespeare's death, was there ever a question that William of Stratford was not the author of his work. Critics were finding it harder and harder to buy that a moderately educated country bumpkin with no experience of court life or the world beyond England could possibly have jotted down the greatest works of Western literature. Only someone with a noble background and a nice expensive education could have pulled off such a thing. And the biggest reason we can't definitively prove this? The theater was not something a respectable person would be a part of. Even though plays were insanely popular in England during the Renaissance, writing or performing them was considered downright vulgar. The Elizabethans believed in Aristotle's great chain of being, where every person has a rank in the universe. Actors were literally one notch below beggars and one notch above thieves. This means that nearly every aristocrat alive during Shakespeare's time has been offered up as the genius behind the pen, but there are 3 who stand out as the most popular, likely, and somewhat credible: Sir Francis Bacon, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, and Shakespeare contemporary Christopher Marlowe. Take a look at these ringers. Let's go over a few important things we know about our friend Will. He was born on April 23, 1564, and he also happened to die on the same day in 1616. His father, John, was a prosperous leatherworker and local politician in the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, England, which gave Shakespeare the opportunity for a free public education. Even though there are no attendance records and no one has ever bragged about being his teacher, Shakespeare mostly likely took classes at the King's New School in Stratford. Nobody knows when or why Shakespeare left his life in Stratford, but we do know that he was working as a player and writer in London by 1592, when poet Robert Greene criticized Shakespeare as an upstart crow beautified by our feathers, basically calling Shakespeare an uncolleged amateur. So let's take a quick look at the richly educated, seasoned veterans that really deserve all the credit. Christopher Marlowe was just 2 months of the day older than Shakespeare and lived a very bizarre and clandestine lifestyle. Marlowe was, allegedly, a homosexual, an atheist, and, best of all, a secret agent. He was a member of Elizabeth's Secret Service, charged with exposing Catholic conspiracies against the Protestant government. Like Shakespeare, Marlowe loved to break the rules of the stage at the time and had a real gift for being subversive. But this is where we hit a slight roadblock. Marlowe was killed in a bar fight in 1593. He was drinking with other secret agents when a drunken argument broke out over the reckoning, which is what they called the tab back then, and in the chaos of things, Marlowe was stabbed in the eye. How can Marlowe possibly be a likely ghost author when his death leaves a gap of more than 20 years and 33 plays between 1593 and Shakespeare's semi-retirement in 1611? Simple, his supporters say. Marlowe used his connections in the spy business to fake his death to escape political charges of hearsay, but still managed to feed himself by writing plays under Shakespeare's name. Besides the fact that copies of Marlowe's autopsy report still exist, the idea of his writing after a fake death doesn't make much sense. Marlowe's and Shakespeare's styles and worldviews are radically different in every way possible. Marlowe's plays like Tamburlaine, The Jew of Malta, and Dr. Faustus are hugely anti-nobility, racist, and pessimistic, while Shakespeare's are even-handed and complex stories like Othello, The Merchant of Venice, and King Lear. Enter contestant number 2, Edward de Vere, a nobleman with a wide range of intellectual interests. He was a generous patron during his life, sponsoring everyone from poets and actors to alchemists and astrologers. De Vere was listed as the best of the concealed writers in the nobility by an anonymous critic in 1589, and author Francis Meres listed him as one of the great poets and comedy writers of the day in 1598. Noblemen writing and publishing for the stage anonymously was common at the time, and some believe that De Vere used Shakespeare's proxy to discuss his turbulent life. There are, admittedly, some moments in Shakespeare's plays that have a lot in common with De Vere's biographies over the years. A robbery pulled off by 3 of De Vere's servants supposedly inspired a scene in Henry IV Part 1, while his terrible married life might have inspired rocky relationships in Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and Othello. But, like Marlowe, we have a slight problem of death. De Vere died in June of 1604, 9 years before plays with Shakespeare's name stopped appearing in London playhouses. It's not hard to believe that a gifted author like De Vere could have left behind a few plays to be performed after his death, but historically this doesn't pan out. The story of a shipwreck on the newly colonized island of Bermuda, which inspired The Tempest, wasn't published until 1610. How could De Vere have possibly known about these events and weave them into the plays before they ever happened? It's been argued that De Vere's lackeys touched up the plays with current events before submitting them, but if De Vere really were the master poet behind these plays, it would be easy to spot a lesser talent's additions. And that name check for Meres? Well, it would be a lot more compelling if he didn't also mention Shakespeare's name in the same paragraph, making it pretty clear that the two definitely aren't the same person. It's also not very convincing that many plays run parallel with De Vere's life. Since we know so little about Shakespeare himself, who's to say he didn't base them on De Vere's life? Or his own home life? Or nobody's at all? In this debate is an improvable conspiracy theory, and a pretty crackpot one at that. Sir Francis Bacon was one of the reasons the term Renaissance man was invented. He was a philosopher, poet, essayist, lawyer, statesman, and one of the most influential scientists in history. He was a world traveler, visiting parts of Europe where Shakespeare set his plays, like Venice, Bohemia, Athens, and Denmark, where Shakespeare himself almost definitely never went. It was this expansive knowledge of so many subjects that started getting Bacon's support, since plays like The Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Juliet, and Troilus and Cressida all make use of chemistry, history, and law. And Bacon's scholastic brilliance? In this case, it really doesn't help him much. Shakespeare was never known for being a great scholar, and those technical aspects in his plays aren't as informed as you might think. It's true that potions and mixtures are an important part of Romeo and Juliet, but the text never explains how they're made or what their ingredients are. Characters in Troilus and Cressida quote Plato and Aristotle in a setting 1,000 years before they were born. The country of Bohemia, modern-day Germany, in the setting for The Winter's Tale, is entirely landlocked but given a coastline by Shakespeare. But don't think that Shakespeare wins the prize by default. There's plenty of evidence in his corner, too. Poet John Webster mentions Master Shakespeare of Stratford in the dedication of his play White Devil. The first published collection of Shakespeare's work, called the First Folio, published in 1623, was made under the watch of actors John Hemmings and Henry Condell. The two had been actors in Shakespeare's company for over 20 years and made the book to keep the memory of so worthy a friend and fellow alive as was our humble Shakespeare. Shakespeare's friend and rival Ben Jonson dedicated a poem in the form of a eulogy in the same book to the memory of my beloved, the author Mr. William Shakespeare, and what he hath left us. Similar eulogies were written from Renaissance icons like Leonard Digges and Hugh Holland, both of whom claimed his work was destined for posterity. More recently, studies like the Claremont Shakespeare Clinic and researchers like Dean Keith Symington, both of whom were out to prove De Vere as the author, concluded beyond a doubt that Shakespeare's style and literary growth through his career have eliminated every possible candidate except for Will himself as the author. The reason many bardophiles take issue with the fact this argument exists at all is because it's remarkably unfair and condescending. Nearly every playwright from Shakespeare's time came from humble backgrounds, but no one has ever questioned their authenticity. Why is it so hard to believe that a middle-class glovemaker's son could be a naturally gifted artist without a university degree and a fancy frilled collar? Will's work has survived longer than most of his peers because of his sensitive and piercing insights into the human experience, something they don't offer courses yet on Cambridge. In the end, it's just simpler and more practical to accept the fact that Shakespeare's humble origins and curiosity inspired him to tell powerful stories, rather than buying into romanticized and groundless conspiracy theories that would take a ridiculous amount of effort from hundreds of people to keep concealed for almost 400 years.